Primero que nada, muchas gracias por estar aquí con nosotros. Buenas tardes y bienvenidos al primer Simposio Sin Murciélago no hay Bacanora, Conservación, Tradición y Resiliencia. Este simposio es parte del proyecto Bacanora for Bats by National Conservation and Sustainable Agave Spirits y será presentado a través de colectivos Sonora Silvestre y Borderlands Restoration Network como parte de nuestros esfuerzos para conservar el agave, los murciélagos y el Bacanora, celebrando la conexión que estos comparten. Los foros se componen de 3 capítulos: Conservación, Tradición y Resiliencia, a través de los cuales se presentará una serie de ponencias a cargo de especialistas en temas relacionados desde diferentes ángulos y contextos, con el objetivo de desarrollar una conexión entre los diferentes sectores involucrados tanto en la industria del Bacanora como en la conservación. Este es el primer foro de los 3 que se llevarán a cabo cada miércoles de junio a las 5 p.m. hora de Sonora y Arizona. En este capítulo tenemos 3 especialistas que nos presentarán sus perspectivas y trabajos con murciélagos en la región. En orden de presentación, gracias a la doctora Kristen Lear, el maestro Omar Calva y la doctora Emma Gómez. Cada ponencia tendrá una duración de aproximadamente 25 minutos y al terminar las 3 ponencias tendremos un espacio para preguntas y discusión con el fin de enriquecer las informaciones. Agradecemos a Connectivity Challenge de Colorado State University Salazar Center por hacer este evento posible. Gracias.
And good afternoon and welcome to our first symposium in this series, In Murciélago no hay Bacanora, Conservation, Tradition, and Resilience. This event is part of the project Bacanora for Bats by National Conservation and Sustainable Agave Spirits and is organized by the Colectivo Sonora Silvestre and Borderlands Restoration Network as part of our agave, bat, and Bacanora conservation efforts, celebrating their dynamic shared connectivity. The forums are made up of 3 chapters: Conservation, Tradition, and Resilience, with presentations from experts in the field of bat conservation, agave conservation, and agave spirits. The goal of these presentations and discussions is to look at the issues from different angles and brainstorm with researchers and stakeholders to develop a connection around Bacanora and agave spirits as well as conservation. This is the first of 3 presentations over the next 3 Wednesday evenings at 5 p.m. Arizona Sonora time. This chapter will have 3 specialists joining us that will be presenting on their work with bats in the Borderlands region. In order of presentation, we would like to welcome and thank Dr. Kristen Lear, Omar Calva, and Dr. Emma Gomez. Each presentation will be approximately 25 minutes and will leave questions and discussion for the end of all the presentations to enrich and elaborate on the conversation. These forums are being recorded and will be subtitled in English and Spanish to distribute to the public later in the year. Thank you to the Connectivity Challenge through Colorado State University Salazar Center for making this event possible.
La doctora Kristen Lear es especialista en intervenciones de especies amenazadas de la organización BCI, Bat Conservation International. La doctora Kristen Lear trabaja en todo el mundo para proteger las distintas especies de murciélagos mediante la investigación, la participación comunitaria en los esfuerzos de conservación y la divulgación pública. Obtuvo su licenciatura en zoología y completó una beca de Fulbright estudiando una especie de murciélago en peligro crítico en Australia. En 2020 obtuvo su doctorado en conservación integrativa de la Universidad de Georgia, donde su trabajo combinó enfoques en ciencias naturales y sociales para ayudar a los esfuerzos de restauración del agave del murciélago maguillero menor, especie en peligro de extinción, y los medios de vida rurales en el noreste de México. En Bat Conservation International, la doctora Lear dirige la iniciativa de restauración del agave para la organización para los murciélagos polinizadores en peligro de extinción en el sureste de Estados Unidos y México. La doctora también es exploradora de National Geographic y le apasiona la divulgación pública para inspirar el aprecio por los murciélagos.
Welcome, Kristen. Dr. Kristen Lear is an endangered species intervention specialist at Bat Conservation International. Dr. Lear works around the world to protect bat species through research, community engagement with conservation efforts, and public outreach. She earned a Bachelor of Arts in Zoology and completed a Fulbright scholarship studying a critically endangered bat species in Australia. In 2020, she earned her PhD in integrative conservation from the University of Georgia, where her work combined natural and social science approaches to aid agave restoration efforts for the endangered Mexican long-nosed bat and rural livelihoods in northeastern Mexico. At Bat Conservation International, Dr. Lear leads the organization's Agave Restoration Initiative for endangered pollinating bats in the US Southwest and Mexico. And Dr. Lear is also a National Geographic explorer and is passionate about public outreach to inspire appreciation for bats.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Can you all see my screen okay? Awesome. Well, thank you for joining. I am super excited today to talk about Bat Conservation International's Agave Restoration Initiative. This is a really, I'm obviously very partial to it, but this is a really fantastic initiative to protect pollinating bats in the US Southwest and Mexico, and also to partner with communities and local stakeholders. We'll go into some of the awesome work that has been done by some of the folks here to protect these bats and also to protect rural livelihoods in Mexico. So at Bat Conservation International, we work around the world to end bat extinctions. We are a nonprofit based in the United States, but we do work worldwide. And two of our missions that really relate to this agave restoration initiative is to implement endangered species interventions and to protect and restore landscapes. And so when we're talking about this agave restoration initiative, we're really trying to achieve these two things. We're trying to protect endangered species, these endangered and threatened pollinating bats, and we're also trying to restore these landscapes with these beautiful agave plants to benefit not only the bats, but also people. Feel free to take a look at the link down below. We have some information about the initiative on Bat Conservation International's website. And so the goal of this initiative really focuses around 3 pollinating or nectar feeding bat species. We have the Mexican long-nosed bat here on the left, which is an endangered species in both the US and Mexico, and also listed as endangered by the IUCN. And then we have the lesser long-nosed bat in the middle, Leptonicterus yerbabuena, and this species is a pretty cool conservation success story. It has recently been delisted from the US endangered species list because of a lot of great work to protect their roosts, but there's still a lot of work to happen that needs to happen to protect their foraging grounds and where they're feeding. And then we have the Mexican long-tongued bat here, the one on the right. And this is a species that we don't know as much about because it roosts in much smaller groups, much smaller colonies or individually. So it's kind of hard to study, but they also feed on agaves and are very important pollinators. So looking at the Mexican long-nosed bat, here in the distribution on the yellow part, you can see the Mexican long-nosed bat comes up into so they're in central Mexico, and then they come up into the Southwest US in Texas, and just a little bit into the boot heel of New Mexico. Now, the lesser long-nosed bat also is found in central Mexico, but then they come up into Northeast Mexico, but they're the ones that come up through Sonora and into Arizona and New Mexico. So we're going to talk about these two today. These are mostly the focus of our agave restoration initiative. So I love this picture. These are some juvenile lesser long-nosed bats, and you can see that they roost in these big groups in caves. So these are cave or mine obligate species, which means they need protected roost sites in order to thrive. So a lot of the work that we do at Bat Conservation International and with partners is to protect the bats' roosting sites, so their caves and their mines. But all of that migration, they migrate from central Mexico all the way up to the US Southwest. All of that relies on following a nectar corridor of blooming agave plants, as well as columnar cacti that provide this really energy-rich nectar. So these bats are undergoing this long-distance migration, and these agaves throughout these regions provide super energy-rich nectar for these bats. And you can see the bats just fly in, they get their nectar, and then they leave, and these agaves are providing a critical food source for these bats. And then in turn, the bats, when they're eating the nectar, they get covered in pollen. You can see the yellow on its fur here. They get covered in this pollen, and then they spread that pollen around to all the other agave plants in the area and pollinate these plants. So really, these bats are critical pollinators to maintain healthy agave populations. So without these bats, we would not have healthy agaves. And we talk about these bats needing agaves, and really in the northern portion of their range where the mothers, either pregnant, you can see pregnant females or lactating females with their babies, they're mainly the ones that migrate northward up into this area. And so they're really dependent on these agave plants for their food resources. And so that's why we're focusing our initiative on restoring these agaves to the landscape. And agaves, as I'm sure a lot of you know, agaves are beautiful plants, huge diversity. There's over 200 species around the world that all they look different and there's different sizes. But the agaves that the bats love are really these big paniculate agaves that have these big branches full of nectar. And before we talk a little more about the bats, I do want to mention that agaves are important not only for bats, but also many, many other animal species. These are just some pictures that I've taken in the field. You can see this ringtail down here, gonna go and get the nectar from the agaves. Lots of different bird species. We have woodpeckers and hummingbirds that drink the nectar. Woodpeckers will make holes and nests in dried agave stalks. And then we even have things like mice that will drink the nectar from these agave plants. So these agaves are really critical parts of the ecosystems where they're found. And agaves are also really important for people. Obviously, we get tequila, mezcal, bacanora, sotol, all these things from agaves that a lot of international attention is focused on. But more locally too, communities around Mexico harvest the sap to make aguamiel or pulque, or to make agave syrup to eat. People also harvest and they cut down the flowering stalks and boil them to eat as a candy, kind of like sugar cane. The dried stalks, like you can see in the right picture, are also used to build fences and houses. The stalks and the flowers and the leaves of agaves are sometimes cut to feed to livestock, so to cattle and goats a lot of times, especially in times of drought when there's not natural forage for the animals. And then the whole agaves themselves are also planted as living fences to delineate property boundaries or to mark off agricultural areas. And they're also planted to help control erosion. So these agaves really are critical parts of ecosystems, but also livelihoods for people. And from these pictures, you can see that really these agaves are just iconic, beautiful parts of the landscapes where they're found. And so without agaves, we'd be missing a lot of critical resources for animals, for people, and also for the general beauty of the landscape. And unfortunately, what we're seeing with bat conservation and these agaves is that across a lot of the range of these migrating bats, we're losing agave habitat. So we're losing habitat to things like wildfires, development, agricultural development, drought. All of these things are affecting bat populations because they're losing their food resources, the agaves. And so that is the goal of Bat Conservation International's Agave Restoration Initiative. We want to restore this nectar corridor for these bats all across their migratory corridor to benefit not only bats, but also people. So we want to protect and restore the landscape, sometimes to look like this picture where we see hundreds of flowering agaves, but agave restoration doesn't have to look like that picture of a huge stand of agaves. It can also be agaves planted as part of landscapes or living fences like we saw earlier. So there's a lot of different ways that this agave restoration can happen. So our goal is to restore these agaves around the roosts where the bats are living, as well as along that migratory corridor for both bats and people. And our goal is to create a climate resilient nectar corridor that supports bats and rural livelihoods. And so I show this map again because I want to show the red stars here where we have been working and we have been doing some agave restoration work. And you can see there's a lot of different areas that are all different social contexts as well as different bats, different bat species. but the one goal that unites them all is to restore these agaves. And so this agave restoration initiative that we're spearheading really is a binational network of researchers, government agencies, conservation groups, local communities, as well as industry, all working together to restore agaves. And because these bats are migratory, this has to be a landscape scale initiative. It can't just be planting agaves one spot and calling it a day. This has to be a large scale landscape scale initiative. And so I love showing all of our partners. These are just some of the amazing network of partners that we've established, including a lot of the folks here across the US Southwest, as well as Northern Mexico. And so the first goal of our agave restoration initiative is to plant native agaves that are native to each area and restore them. And this 100,000 number is an estimate. We are working to achieve at least that, but we're hoping to achieve more in the long term. And then we also want to not only plant new agaves, we also want to protect current agave stands that have high densities of agaves. Like in this picture, if there's already an area with a lot of agaves, we are working to protect those areas to maintain those agave populations. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the achievements that we've had to date through our amazing partnerships and the work that we've been doing over the past about 3 to 4 years. So because agaves, I'm sure we'll learn more about agaves, but in general, they are very long-lived. They take 2, 3, 5, 10 years, or even longer to mature and to flower. And once they flower, that plant dies. And so agave restoration really requires long-term commitments from partners and communities. And so we've been really excited to have 11 conservation agreements that are 10 years long with some of the communities that we're working with in Northeast Mexico. And again, this is really exciting because 10 years is a long time, but it really is important to have these long-term commitments for these agaves. We've also started collecting native agave seeds and growing them in greenhouses. And I love this drone video. You can see how we collect agave seeds from the old stalks. It's not a super complicated process, but it's quite fun. And then you get these you can see the little white and black seeds. The black ones are the ones that we grow because they're fertilized. And then we have baby agaves that we can plant out on the landscape. And so in order to grow those agaves, we have also started helping support greenhouses or nurseries in the US and in Mexico. And so I love having these different pictures to show that these greenhouses can look different. They don't all have to look the same. And this is part of the work that Borderlands Restoration Network is doing, is they're creating an agave booklet that has information about how to build and create your own greenhouse to then grow agaves using the resources that you have available. And so we're really excited. You can see all the little baby agaves there, and it's been really successful over the past couple of years. And in Sonora, we're partnering with Naturalia to do this. We're partnering to develop a greenhouse. You can see in the pictures here. And then they have started collecting these agave seeds and propagating them that then can be planted out on their reserve in Los Fresnos. So this is something that we're kind of getting going in Sonora, and we're really excited about. We do have over 20,000 agave plants growing throughout the US Southwest and Northern Mexico. So that is a lot of agave plants. And to date, we have planted over 15,000 plants, which is really, it's an achievement for us because it takes a lot of strong partnerships. So we've been working with state and federal lands in the US. We've been working with mining companies, for example, this picture, Freeport-McMoRan, salvaging agaves from their land where they're gonna develop a mine and moving those and replanting those agaves to other areas. We've been working, obviously, with the Bacanora producers through Colectivo Sonora Silvestre. and many others to do these agave restorations. So far, we've planted 4,000 agaves in Arizona and New Mexico, a bit over 10,000 in Northeast Mexico, and a little over 1,600 in Sonora. And in addition to planting the agaves themselves, we're also working, a lot of the work we're doing in Northeast Mexico is to protect the land. Like I said, not just planting agaves, but also protecting these agaves. So far with our local partners, the Species Sociedad y Habitat, we've protected over 380 hectares in Northeast Mexico, and also engaged in that area 11 of these ejidos, and trained ejido members on sustainable agricultural and grazing practices, so that they can then use that land not only for agaves for the bats and for them to use, but also for many other crops and other purposes for their local uses. And then I'm really excited to talk about this because I know this is something that is a really exciting part of our work and our partnerships that we can't really claim credit for. So if you have questions later, we'll definitely have Valeria and the others chat about this. But Colectivo Sonora Silvestre has partnered with the Bacanora Regulatory Council to start creating a bat-friendly Bacanora label. This label so far, it's being developed, but so far 3 producers have been engaged in this project where they let 1% of their agave crop flower for the bats and then make Bacanora with the remaining 99% of their crop, and then they will get the bat-friendly label. And these are some fantastic pictures from Colectivo showing some of the conservation gardens that they have established. So through this project, planting these agaves and having these really cool, you can see these educational signs that explain what the project is and that this Bacanora producer is participating in this effort to protect the bats. And then also Colectivo is using living fences, so planting agaves as living fences that can then be food for the bats, so on the producer's land. And then finally, they're developing these agroecological guidelines to help producers understand how they can go about joining this label and actually getting all the ecology right for the bats and for the agaves. So these manuals are, I believe they're available and can be shared out with producers if they would like to get involved. And I have to mention, there is precedent for this kind of bat-friendly label. There is a bat-friendly tequila and mezcal label that was developed several years ago by Dr. Rodrigo Medellin and David Suro. And you can see the little label here on a bottle where they worked with tequila and mezcal producers to let, I think it was about 5% of their crop flower for the bats, and then they get this cool sticker. So this is a really neat program, and there's some of the links down below if you want to take a look. But there is precedent for this, and so I'm really excited to see where the Bacanora label goes. So what's next for BCI's Agave Restoration Initiative? We've been launching this project for several years. We work in a lot of different areas, but what we really want to work on as we move forward is these additional community-based projects. We want to help establish government agreements, like working with the Bacanora Regulatory Council. We want to expand our agave restoration efforts to include additional communities throughout Mexico and the US to get these long-term conservation agreements in place to help communities and producers pursue these bat-friendly and bat conservation goals. And of course, we would love to help support these local agave-based enterprises. So this picture here is from Nuevo León, where the women have they have many different products, but some of them are agave products that they sell on local markets. So we're really excited to start partnering with some of these communities to help get these enterprises off the ground that support both bat populations and the local economies. And then finally, we're looking more into linking the agave restoration efforts to food security as well as to climate change mitigation. So with food security, the greenhouses that we are starting to develop in certain areas, the hope is that those greenhouses can be used by the communities into the future to help grow things like food plants, vegetables, or things that they can sell on local markets. So it's not just greenhouses for agaves, it's also greenhouses for the communities. And then with climate change mitigation, agaves do sequester carbon and nitrogen. They're pretty good for climate change mitigation. And so we're looking at ways that we can incorporate those kind of metrics into our agave work. And overall, like I said, this project is near and dear to my heart because it's really about focusing not only on the bats, but also on people. And we can't do this without all these strong partnerships. So thank you, everyone. If you want to get in touch about the initiative or have further questions, feel free to shoot me an email after the presentation.
Gracias, Kristen. Y bienvenido Omar Calva. Vamos a introducir un poco acerca de él. Omar Calva es maestro en ciencias y biólogo egresado de la Universidad de Sonora. Lleva 9 años explorando e investigando cuevas. Es cofundador del Grupo Pionero Espeleológico de Sonora, GEPES. Es miembro de la Unión Mexicana de Grupos Espeleológicos y subdirector de la revista Mundos Subterráneos en México. Sus intereses incluyen la biología de las cuevas, los ecosistemas subterráneos y su fauna cavernícola, incluidos los murciélagos. Ha explorado varias cuevas en países como Inglaterra, Francia, Indonesia, Australia y México. Su más reciente logro corresponde al Premio Estatal de la Juventud 2019, en la categoría Logro Académico, por sus aportaciones en la investigación de cuevas y su fauna en el estado de Sonora. Muchas gracias, Omar.
Master in Biosciences and biologist, graduated from the University of Sonora, Omar has been exploring and researching caves for 9 years. He is co-founder of the Grupo Pionero Espeleológico de Sonora, member of the Mexican Union of Speleological Groups, and deputy editor of the magazine Mundos Subterráneos. His interests include cave biology, subterranean ecosystems, and their cave-dwelling fauna, including bats. He has explored several caves in countries such as England, France, Indonesia, Australia, and Mexico. His most recent achievement corresponds to the State Youth Award 2019 in the category Academic Achievement for his contributions in the research of caves and their fauna in the state of Sonora. Thank you, Omar.
So, to summarize, I love caves. No? That's all my resume. So today I will start in English. I will do it in English. I hope also it's a challenge for me, but I will like to present in English. So I will explain a little about caves. I will and my experience with bats in here in Sonora. In numbers, you're watching the numbers, correct? Yes. Well, the bats around the world, we have 1,400 species, and this is growing and growing. There's new discoveries everywhere, and in Mexico it's also growing. When I started, it was 139, and I think now it's almost 144. So there's still new discoveries, or maybe new distributions that are coming to Mexico. So, and in Sonora, we have the 39 species of that numbers. So that means that only in Sonora we have like the 20% of Mexico, and also we have almost all the families of the bats in Sonora. What are kind of bats? Well, we have all the bats from the different food habits. We have the one who eat insects, the one who eat fruits, the nectar, other diets, and even the one who feed in blood we have in Sonora. All the food habits we have in here, and is the proportion. This is proportionally talking about around the world, but it's the same that all the most common animal, the bats that eat are the insectivorous. So in here is the same thing, the same proportion. Most of the bats are insectivorous, then the fruit eaters and nectar eaters. And we have the one who eat fishes in the coast. Also in the small part of Sonora, we have the one who feed on blood. So we have a well representation of bats in the second state of, the second biggest state of Mexico. Now, talking about how many plants are pollinator, because we are focused only in the start of these projects that you are involved. I will talk more about the lesser known nose bat because it's the only one that I ever work. I have knowledge about the nivalis and the other one, the Chromicteris mexicana, but never working by myself. I know some points that they have in some minds, but I will focus in this one. So pollinators have, well, pollinate over 500 plants, and a lot of them are importantly economic from the humans. And as Christy told us, the way they pollinate, they dust the head in the flowers. This is a picture in the pinacate. It's from the pinacate. I didn't take it. It was Jen's. But I was there when they taken the photo, so it was my experience too. And now that I have the introduction of that, I will focus in the thing I know more about caves. And actually, this is the biggest maternity rooms that everybody knows in Sonora, that is in Pinacate. This is the entrance. And then you can see in there, you can see about their pregnancy. They having already the babies. They are coming out to feed. And this is, curiously, they call it cave, but it's not a cave because it's a different formation. It's a lava tube. But we know that if you are not in that part of the, like a caver, you will say cave to everything hole that you see. But this is a lava tube, different origin, but the conditions are similar between caves, lava tubes, and other types of environmental, subterranean environmentals. So this is the entrance, and we are focused in this one, in this cave, and also in another one that I work in my master, because lucky me, I found a healthy population of this bat that they use it also as a maternity roost. So now we have two that we don't know even how many they are, but we found this and we are conserving that place. So as a caver and a biology, I always share this definition because when you're looking in for example, the manager programs from landscaping, you just mention, and in that section, there's a cave. And they don't talk more about that. But caves, even they are small compared with all the landscaping, all the ecosystem, they are, even they're like hot spot about diversity inside. And sometimes we didn't take the second consideration. So why? Because caves and the other cavities that we have, they are called more like subterranean environments. We have to think more in that way because any cavity could be this kind of environment. Because even when for example, the turtles make a hole, that kind of cavity is also an subterranean environment because they have these conditions, for example, complete dark, the temperature are constantly, the humidity is higher. So that even is like a small cave, that kind. So this kind of caves, lava tube, even abandoned mines are good for some species. And in this case, the one who colonize more, and I see that in here in Sonora, are bats. They colonize these kind of places everywhere. We find in here and even in houses with that same conditions between the roof. And what are important, this is the recently photo that I will share with you about the Pinacate maternity roost. I take it 1 month ago. I was there. And this is one of the part of the babies of the Pinacate. So we can be sure that we have, still have a good population there with all the efforts between the United States and Mexico that are working in the conservation of this bat. So we have to wait for the count that we make, but at least still babies in the cave, in the lava tube, sorry. And they're important because they are sized to protect and they have enough space for the roof. Even some caves, they look like rooms because one room is for one species and they are divided. Sometimes they are sharing. I have all this knowledge in one cave in specific that I will talk later. But in this cave in this lava tube is only this species in May. There's no more. Maybe Macrotus appears sometimes, another one, and that's all. And what are important the caves? So when you are looking for bats, it's important to looking for where are they. We know that not all the bats roost in caves. Maybe they roost in trees, they may be in other places. But over 100 species of bat in Mexico are considered that they use always caves, or in some part of his life they use this kind of environment. So they are important, and we have to take care not only about the bats. If we protect the cave will be even also better if we are involved in that section. I share with you the bats the bat caves that we have in Sonora, like discovered, or that we have knowledge as a group. As remember, I am a member of the Grupo Pioneros Paleológico of Sonora. So we already have information from the example of Alamos. There was a lot of activity there. But then we start to moving more to the north, and obviously to the Pinacate, that it was the most common. So in the center of Sonora and in the border, we have caves. And the only one that you can see that is in yellow in the presentation is because it's the only one that we didn't find evidence of bats. All of them, they have bats. Not all of them, they have the lesser nose bat, but we have this kind of information that all these, I think it's 14 caves, and we're still looking for more. I think the update number is 14, is 16, and this also is still with presence of bats. Now I will share with you an example of what we can find in one cave. As you know, I work, my master was in caves, and I was so ambitious, and I decided, yes, I want to know all the species that live in the cave. And they say, all of them, yes, even the small animals, insects, yes. So it was very difficult that years, but I did it. So I studied two caves that is called CM and CT, that is Cueva de la Mariana and Cueva El Tigre. Cueva El Tigre is one of the most famous, and it was the only one that we know before I start exploring caves, because they have like 1 million of Tadaria brasilensis in that part. So it was popular for that, and there's a lot of research like in the 60s about that cave. The other ones, even it was so close, it was less than 1 kilometer, they didn't know about that cave. And in the first time that they go there in the 60s, they mentioned the presence of Leptonicteris, but nivalis, no yerbabuena. So I think it was not a good description, because it's not a distribution. So it should be yerbabuena. When I go there, I didn't find it, but in the other cave, we find the population of Leptonicteris yerbabuena. So the one that I told you, that I discovered this population that they use it as a maternity roof, they came back, they start coming in February to have the babies in May. And I have that evidence for the moment, because I discovered late in my master. It was the last thing that I discovered in my master, but we discovered that there was a maternity roof. It was not only like a set to rest and continue. No, it's a maternity roost. So in this cave, I found 7 species, and in the other one was 4. So only in Mariana caves of Cueva de la Mariana represents 80% of the species with distribution in Sonora. Only one cave, and we are discovering more caves. So this is like the relevance of cave in Sonora, that we don't know yet how much we have, because we just start, but it's one of the best examples that we have. Only 1 year, and I'm very sure that there's more species, because my method, it was not so good. It was not with nets, mist nets, for example. It was more directly. So I'm very sure there could be more only in that cave, and imagine too what we can discover from each of these species in that cave. And what are bats important in the cave also? Because we saw what are the important outside, but are also important inside. So for example, this is the food web that I create with the species that I described, because I found 52 species in one cave, between insects and other arthropods and mammals, everything. You find a lot of things in that cave. So this is the food web that everything starts with the bats. These bats provide the guano, and the animals who eat from this guano are a lot of ácaros and pseudoscorpions, beetles, and they will feed another ones, and there the mammals appears, another mammals, also even the crotalus, the rattlesnakes coming inside the cave to eat some of even of the bats. So it was a complex food web that I found in this cave. So if we remove this species only for this cave, I will produce like the 70% of the food web will disappear in only one cave. So imagine counting the other ones. And I told you this, there are no endemic species, but they have a strong dependence of that cave, this species. I even find mammals in very deep that they have like a method to be there, because it's a good source of food for them. It was curious also, for example, I compared my study because I also put in this cave, I also put a trap camera, and only in 1 year with only 2 cameras, one entrance between Tigre and Mariana, I found the same animals that persons who use hundreds of cameras around the areas. So caves are important places not only for bats, but bats are the ones who create the food web, and everything starts when they colonize these caves. There's stories that when a bat entered to a mining, they will start creating a small a food web, and there's when they happen the trilobites species, and there was more specialized. So this kind of even there's like increasing the speciation of even the bats, because they have sometimes specific sites to visit. Now comparing the maps that I have here with this one from Menchaca, I worked with Menchaca in the 2016 in Pinacate, so I know about his work. And as you see, he's mentioned the migration and the times. So in here, I want to share that, well, we know that this bat is moving always in the coast. So maybe there's no how to say, there's no a lot of the Leptonictris zeroinae close to the area of the Bacanora, because they think they are only visit the coast. They're moving within the corridor of the hectare corridor that we have. However, that I put the only caves that I have information with the Leptonictris zeroinae presence. We have the Lava 2 in Pinacate, and we have Cueva de la Mariana and Cueva de Liguera. They are in the center. So in this circle is like the area that in what night the bat could move through this whole area. And I put here Bacanora, and the map that you see are the towns that are allowed to produce Bacanora. Son los municipios de denominación de origen de Bacanora. So they're closed with Cueva de la Mariana. The interesting here is we don't know what is next to there, because now I have a population in the center of Mexico that are moving maybe to that area when there is the production of Bacanora. But we don't know what is more inside. Maybe we have more populations, because close to Cueva de la Mariana, when I go in the car, there's not a lot of agaves, and there's not a lot of saguaros and pitayas flows. They have to move a lot, but they're in the center. So this is one that we know, but I don't know, is more to the north. We will find, and maybe you will have more benefits if we detect any cave close to them. Because this is Cueva de la Mariana. They are the babies, but they are in the stage that they can fly now. So it's. And the trees that I detect is some owners visit the caves to get the guano to fertilize. So they don't know in which time have to do it. So they are following my instructions and in that part. But also the alteration. Some people are burning some places to move the bats from there. And the degradation of the habitat, sometimes they close mines that are abandoned without knowing if someone are using it. So that's the threat that we, as a group, we are detecting in this moment from Sonora. And we have not only to protect the bats, if we also protect the homes, will be better, and we can save even more diversity, not only the bats. That's all for me. Thank you. For more information, this is my contact, and if you know about caves over there, I will be happy to help you and explore. Thank you.
Omar, that was so wonderful. Thank you so, so much. I'm gonna book you for every presentation we're doing from now on. I've never heard one of your presentations, so that was really special. Thank you. Doctora Gomez, would you like to set up your screen share, and then we can go through the bios, please?
Of course.
Muchas gracias, doctora Emma. La doctora Emma Gómez es una bióloga mexicana. Obtuvo su doctorado en Ciencias de la Vida Silvestre y la Pesca en la Universidad de Texas. Tiene más de 15 años de experiencia haciendo trabajo de campo en México y estudiando murciélagos. Los premios internacionales han reconocido su labor de investigación y conservación. Es miembro fundador de la Red de Conservación de Nivalis, un grupo de colaboración de conservacionistas e investigadores de instituciones académicas estadounidenses y mexicanas, organizaciones sin fines de lucro y organismos gubernamentales que trabajan por la conservación del murciélago mayor, Leptometres nivalis, en peligro de extinción.
Dr. Gomez Ruiz is a Mexican biologist, obtained her PhD in wildlife and fisheries sciences at Texas A&M University. She has more than 15 years of experience doing fieldwork in Mexico and studying bats. International awards have recognized her research and conservation work. She is a founding member of the Nivalis Conservation Network, a collaborative group of conservationists and researchers from US and Mexican academic institutions, nonprofit organizations, and government agencies working for the conservation of the endangered Mexican long-nosed bat, Leptometres nivalis. Thank you, Emma.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this amazing event. I have never been to Sonora, so I hope someday I can work there or see the bats that have it there. My presentation is in Spanish, and also I will try to do it in English, explain it in English. So most of my work with the pollinating bats has been on the Mexican long-nosed bat, the greater long-nosed bat, Leptometres nivalis. And most of my work has been in the northern states of Mexico, in Coahuila, Nuevo León. So I will be talking about what are the things we have been focusing on. I had some introduction of general information about bats, but that's probably redundant at this point because Kristen and Omar already mentioned a lot of these facts. Okay, so let's see why bats that pollinate agaves why this service is at risk of disappearing. So, like I say, I'm going to be focusing more particular on the relationship of the bats and the agave, and what are the threats that these bats are facing, also in relationship to the foraging habitat availability, and what we have found in terms of climate change potential threats, and also land cover change that has been affecting especially the Mexican long-nosed bat. Okay, I'm going to go fast on this part. Of course, this was just the general information about what are bats and why are they so important. So it's the second group of mammals that is the most diverse in the world, and they have amazing adaptations. Of course, they are mammals. They give milk to their pups. They only have 1 or 2 per year, and we have more than 1,400 species in the world, and more being discovered. So most of the bats feed on insects, are insectivorous, and about 27% are feed on fruits or nectar. And there's 3% remaining here that where we found bats that feed on fish or other animals. And let's see. Oh, and for each feeding habit, they have different special adaptations in the form of their ears, in the form of their feet, also in their echolocation adaptations to find their food. And what I'm going to be focusing on, of course, today is on the bats that are adapted to feed on the nectar, and the importance of this relationship with bats and plants in terms of seed dispersal and also pollination. There's a lot of plants that are important, that have economic importance and also ecological importance, that rely on pollination by bats. More than 500 species of plants have been documented to be pollinated by different species of bats in the world. And what are the characteristics of these plants? And of course, the characteristics of the bats. I have a few pictures here. If you look at the flowers, they tend to be large, they tend to be light colored, and they also produce more nectar at night. So all of these characteristics are related to a flower syndrome called chiropterophile syndrome. So they love bats. They have been co-evolving to attract bats because these pollinators are the ones that do the best job transporting, moving the pollen from flower to flower. And one of the plants that are linked, that are associated with this flower syndrome are the agave plants, the century plants. Particularly within the agaves, the subgenus agave. We have two subgenus within agave, and Litea is the ones that have all the flowers. They don't have branches. It's not a paniculate kind. It's just that the flowers are more attached to the stalk, to the main stalk. And the paniculate agaves, which is the subgenus agave, is like the picture that I'm showing here on the right. And the paniculate agaves are the group of agaves that are the ones that have the most number of species, is the most diverse group. And it is the type of flowers that are flowers more extended in branches that have been related more to attract bats. And there is evidence linking Leptonectaris, the genus Leptonectaris, and the speciation in this subgenus in the paniculate agaves. Agaves, as also Kristen mentioned, are very important in arid regions, are important for local economies in Mexico, they help retain soil in many areas, and also they're very unique because they only produce flower once in their lifetime. So it's a suicidal blooming event. And like I say, well, they rely, most of the species, a lot of the species have not been studied yet in their reproductive ecology, but for several species that there is information, linking bats as the best, doing a better job pollinating, moving the pollen of these plants, because bats cover their hair completely with the pollen, and they can fly long distances to connect these patches of agaves. Also, what we see in this group of plants, it's a lot of hybrids. So it seems like they're in continuously evolving, of course, and the links, I mean, the limits between species are not that strict, because they hybridize a lot. And of course, that's related to the presence of the pollinators. This is a paper I like to mention because it's a paper that relates the timing and rate of speciation in the agave to the presence of Leptonicteris bats. So the agaves of this subgenus, the paniculate agaves, speciated, or we found more species in arid environments, and they link this speciation to the presence in the evolutionary history of these bats, of Leptonicteris bats. So for agaves, bats are not the only pollinators. There are other animals that pollinate, that can do the job too, but is not as effective in connecting different patches of these plants, because they will flower at different times and in isolated patches, and they will only do it once in their life cycle. That can last, it depends on the species, but it can be up to 8 years, the end of their life cycle or more. And Christian already showed us this similar slide to this. So these are the 3 bat species that are adapted to feed on nectar, that are considered pollinators, and that, as we can see in the maps here, the distribution comes all the way up to the northern portion of Mexico and southern US. But there's also another bat that it's not adapted, or it doesn't have the characteristics of feeding on nectar with the long nose, the long tongue. This bat is more insectivorous. It's found also feeding on the agaves, feeding on the flowers, not only on agaves, also on cactus. And there's evidence that they actually do a good job pollinating as well. And speaking of the Mexican long-nosed bat, particularly, we can see the map, the approximate distribution here. What I'm showing here is the distribution of the Mexican long-nosed bat, the Leptonicteris nivalis, and it's a migratory species. We only find it in the northern portion here of the range, starting in the spring, but more during the summer. And it's the timing when we have the flowering season of the agaves here in the north. This species migrates. The consensus is that the species will migrate following the blooming events of the agave. So different species of agaves will bloom at different times, and also there's variation as you move latitudinally and altitudinally in elevation. So along the mountains, and that's something I'm going to be talking a bit more about, along the mountain ranges, we find more species of agaves, and we have more resources available for the bat, because we will have blooming available at different times, and in the end is for longer time. So, okay. On the diet for this species, there has been documented many species of agaves. We're still working on studying the diet in the north, because the studies have been mainly in the central distribution or southern distribution of the species. But we know, we found agave for sure, and it's linked the presence of the bat when the paniculate agaves are blooming. So one study we did to understand how the corridor, this nectar corridor, will look like, or where will be located. We modeled the distribution of this corridor using different species of agaves, using modeling algorithms. And so bats, we relate the knowledge that we have of the presence of the bat with our models of the agave, different agave species presence. What we see here in this map, it's the agave richness. So as you can see, the colors here along the mountains, we find more agaves, different agave species than in the lower areas, of course. And we related, we created a model to try to see if the locations of the bat are related more to the presence of higher agave richness than expected as chance, and there is a relationship. So bats, there's a relationship between agave richness and the presence of the bats moving along the corridor. And we think it's because it can be because the availability of flowers that having different species in those areas will provide to the bats. Also on analyzing fragmentation, habitat loss, we did models, and what we see here, we use land cover maps for different vegetation types in Mexico, and selected those that overlap with the distribution of the agaves that we know the bats are using. And we do see a loss in general, a general trend loss. This is only showing Coahuila, Nuevo León, and part of this portion of Mexico. But we see a trend on reduction of the habitat availability, and it's mainly due in part to the growth of urban areas, but also just loss due to wildfires. Wildfires have been affecting a lot of this region. Actually, very recently we have huge impacts along these regions here in the Sierra Plegada in Nuevo León. And we also wanted to know what, in terms of climate change, how this can be affecting this corridor and disrupting this food availability. So we developed maps for the future for the different agave species, and then created agave richness maps again with the different maps. And we find that there will be a loss in more than 80% of the area in general of the distribution of the agaves by 2070. And it's also this is on one side, and as we lose those areas, we can see the corridor is more fragmented, right? There's more gaps along the corridor, and it will be, especially in the northern portion, is where we are at most risk of losing the species. No? Also, what is climate change, it can be affecting the phenology of the plants, the agaves, when the flowers are available, the timing of the flowers. So for that, we are trying to start monitoring the phenology in the different portions of the range of the where the bat migrates. What are the agaves that are blooming at the moment in each region. So we try to take these are the type of information we gather when we go sample in the field, but also we think this is a good this is a good project for a citizen science type of project that is still not fully implemented, but I think it will be good to to take in consideration, especially in Mexico. And this platform, which is the iNaturalist, could be, we have been trying to put it up through this platform. And so people will show their observations, and also we will ask them to indicate the phenology of the plant so that we can download that information with the coordinates and date, and eventually we can see trends if phenology, if the flower availability is changing through time or not. That's our hope for the future, but still a lot of work to do there. So there are 30 roosts documented for this species, and only 11 have had some level of monitoring over the past 20 years. The region where I work particularly is in this cave Rosillo and this cave in Infierno. Rosillo is in Coahuila, Infierno here in Nuevo León. Both we have captured females that are lactating females. For sure, Infierno, we know it's maternity roost, and Rosillo potentially. But Rosillo is a cave that is, it's huge. It's 1 kilometer long. It's like a tunnel with huge ceilings. And there's also a large colony of the Mexican free-tailed bats. So capturing and monitoring and counting the nivalis there is not easy. Okay, so for this work, in order to understand what's going on with the species, it's endangered. Of the 3 bats that we mentioned that are adaptive nectar feeding bats, and this is the one that it's in at most risk. And so we are partnering. That's why the Nivalis Conservation Network was created, to try to collaborate different researchers working with the species throughout the corridor. We are starting to do coordinated bat counts at the different roosts, also marking bats with the pit tags, which is like a chip, to see if the bats that we mark in some sites are moving to the next site, or where are they going, to better understand what's going on. And of course, Bat Conservation International has been the organization putting together all of the group. What are we doing in terms of monitoring roosts and foraging sites? This picture it's a picture of the entrance of Rosillo Cave, the cave that I was mentioning that is like a tunnel, huge entrance. And there's another cave on the other side, but this is the cave that has where you can find the species, the Trinitary nivalis. What we do at the caves, we go in and try to see evidence of the yellow guano that looks like this. That would be evidence that there's the nectar feeding bats there. It's very, very distinguishable and unique. As you can see in this picture, bats get fully covered in pollen. Oh, I already mentioned that. Also, we are starting to use camera traps at the flowering agaves to document visits of the different species. And this method turns out to be very useful to also work with local communities, because it's very easy to train them, and there's no risk. They don't have to handle bats, and they can set the cameras and monitor and document the presence of this species. And I will show you more pictures of the results of those cameras. Also, with echolocation, Yalin Rivera did her master's work at Texas A&M, describing the echolocation of the Leptonitrid nivalis, because there was no full description, and also Cheronicteris mexicana, the Mexican long-tongued bat. And with that, we hope to be able to use this information to monitor as well with acoustics, which can be another option. This is an example of what we get from the camera traps. So we can actually distinguish the species, particularly in those areas where we only have the greater long-nosed bats, because of course both the the greater long-nosed bat and the Electroneter nivalis and Electroneter yerbabuena will be very similar, probably to distinguish from the picture with no reference. But we can distinguish from the Mexican long-tongued bat, as we can see here very clearly, the other species. We are creating, for example, activity patterns and see how they're using, if they're the resources that are scarce, that are not abundant, and how they're splitting the use throughout the night and the use of the agaves. This was the preliminary work that one of my students, Maria Hernandez Hilerio, did for her undergrad research. We also get other flower visitors, and it's interesting. I like to show this picture of how, for example, for moths, they don't even touch the flower. No? So they do visit the flowers, but they are not doing a good job pollinating there. Versus the bats that go all the way inside. Sometimes we see this happens so fast that the way we're using the cameras, actually it's on video mode, not on photograph mode, because it's the only way to get the shot, and then we have to go frame by frame and then obtain these images. Well, I want to thank lots of organizations. Again, this is the work and efforts of lots of people interested and invested in doing what we can to help save these bats, and of course the agaves. Thank you so much.